Hello, welcome back. Last time I got the basic pad frames assembled, and that opened up a whole new world of possibilities of things that I can do to make some progress with these. So I'm doing a little bit of spray painting here. There are a few things I need to paint. This was the first one I did because it was relatively small, and I just wanted to get a little bit of practice doing it. These are the frame joint brackets. They hold the two pads together in the front and the back. They were just bare, dirty metal, so I just wanted to paint them black to make them look a little bit nicer since it's an exposed part. The box contains the spray. I'm doing this in my front porch. So the pad frames themselves need a little bit of paint. I'm going to be putting white paint in all 8 of the arrow wells so that LED light will propagate better. That's the hope, at least. LEDs are still a thing I'm in the process of figuring out. I don't know why I've left them for basically the last thing, but they're still in progress. So I wanted to protect the sensor bracket threaded inserts with masking tape so that they wouldn't get painted, because I didn't want paint clogging up my threads. I also wanted to contain the paint to just the arrow wells if possible, so I put some tape along the outside edge after I get those done. I repeat this process for all 8 of the arrow panels. I just show the one panel here. So tape along the outside, just so that it's a little cleaner. This is not at all necessary. I'm going to be... Actually, no, there won't... Yeah, that's right. The corner stoppers, at least, will be glued to those areas. I figure glue will hold better to bare wood than to paint. I don't actually know that for sure, though. And I'm sure it would do fine with paint on it. Anyway. So I do that for all 8 of the arrow wells. Then back out on my porch again, I paint them. So this wood was thirstier than I expected. You can see how much spray it's taking to start having an effect. And you can also see how much is blowing back into my face. This was kind of a terrible environment for this. There wasn't really as much ventilation as there should have been. I'm wearing a respirator, but unfortunately it does not make a very clean seal with my face with a big fluffy beard, so that didn't work extremely well. So the whole room, and actually my whole house, even though this is in the front porch, kept the doors closed as much as I could, but whole house ended up smelling like weird chemical banana peels after this, which is what spray paint smells like to me. So yeah. Just paint all those. The can... Spray paint does not go nearly as far as I thought it did. I used the entire can, I think, actually on the first coat here for both pads. So they only have one coat of white paint. This didn't have to be extremely precise. After I coated both of them once, I went back and sprayed the last little bit in where it looked patchy. And they came out okay, but they could have been a little more uniform if I'd had another can. I just didn't know how much I needed to buy, because I thought it would go further than it did. Other pad was in the same area, so just turn around, paint it the same way. I didn't bother protecting the wire channels, you can see them there. They didn't need it. Spray paint doesn't really clog things up too bad, but like screw threads or something I want to be extra careful not to mess with. So whole can's basically done. I'm spraying the last little bit on the other pad there. And then just leave those to dry for a while. After they're dried, take off the tape. And everything looks pretty good. Masking tape did its job, and contained the paint. Actually, the real reason, another reason in addition to the threaded inserts that I wanted to protect those was the numbers, since I've written numbers 1 to 32 to match those specific things with sensor brackets there. So right here, this is very noisy. So right here, I'm drilling some holes to put in threaded inserts for leg levelers to be installed on the bottom of both pads. I'm using a spade bit there. I did a test cut with it, since I'd had some kind of not so great experiences with spade bits earlier. I did a test cut with it on a scrap 2x3, and it just went through it like it wasn't even there. But with plywood, it has a lot more trouble. If you watch closely where it's drilling, you can see it scraping through the layers of wood and adhesive, like it goes light, dark, light, dark. It's still on light. This takes a lot of pressure and a lot of time to actually get anywhere. I don't know what happened there. Maybe it got through the last of the plywood and is now working on the 2x3 under it. With this particular bit, it was a little bit hard to gauge the depth of where I was drilling. I was trying to figure out how deep exactly I wanted to go. Sure kicks up a lot of wood chips. So I'm getting that pencil in there. Yeah, there were a lot of wood chips in there, so I couldn't see visually how far down it was. But I put the pencil in all the way down, compared it to the threaded insert to see how close I was to the intended depth. Now, I only drilled down enough space for the inserts to go in, and that was actually a little bit of a mistake. I'll cover that a little bit later when it comes up. Guess I decided I wanted a little bit more there. I wanted to at least get all the way through the base plate to the frame underneath it. Looks like it'll fit. So next corner. Yeah, I tried to get these into a place where I moved them inward just far enough so that my my drill guide attachment would... It has 4 little rubber feet on the bottom, which are kind of close to the outside. I moved it just far enough in so that those could all sit level. And that happened to be a good spot anyway. That guide kind of contains most of the sawdust as it comes out. Makes a nice little pile right there. So, since all of the weight of the pads is going to be going through these threaded inserts into the leg levelers, they're the only things that contact the floor. I want them to be in a strong position, ideally as anchored as firmly to the frame as I can. So I tried to get these all into places where they would be, they would have frame pieces behind them. The back ones are not nearly as good as the front ones, because in the front I have 2 2x3s sort of doubled up. In the back I have this awkward little corner piece that's not really strongly anchored to anything else other than the base plate. And that's where the outside corner is, so that's kind of where it has to go. Then on the other side I have just the 1 2x3, so on this side it ends up... there's only a little bit less than half of a 2x3 under this hole. You can see I'm drilling in where the mark is. So that should be about half. It's hard to explain what I'm trying to say, but I think I moved the camera in so you can kind of see what happened there. So that went all the way through the plywood. On the inside... oh, I see. On the inside... Yeah, on the right side, that's 2x3. On the left side, that's just empty space. So at least the insert has something to sit against, even if it's not super great. If I were doing this again, I would add another piece of wood in there, and also drill these holes deeper. Yeah, I'll demonstrate why soonish. So I didn't have a spare bolt for installing these things, but just using the actual leg leveler gave me enough space. So, let's see. I lost my place in the video. There we go. So we got the 2 nuts on there, as always. Threaded insert on the end, tighten them up, and then you can just sort of screw the thing in, and it kind of just goes. These particular threaded inserts are made from metal. The leg leveler screw threads are M16 2.0. So that's 16 millimeters wide, 2 millimeter thread pitch. In a typical hardware store, it's kind of impossible to find metric bolts that large. I could have ordered one online special, I'm sure. Right, also the threaded inserts were hard to find. I could not find any at all for wood. I could only find these ones that are designed for metal. But they did the job just fine. The challenge here is keeping it straight. Fortunately, the thing my hand is resting on turns, so it can stay stationary while the rest of the thing turns all the way in. This was also a lot of work. Very large thing going into a tight hole in wood. These came pre-lubricated with that red stuff that's sort of squirting out the sides there. And it did the job just fine. Like, even if they were designed for metal, they seem to be okay in wood. So loosen up the nuts. Top one's loose. Loosen the bottom. It's at this point that I'm wishing for a second adjustable wrench, because I can't really hold the nut at the very top of the leg leveler there. So I get a pair of pliers to do the job. It does okay. I went and got a second adjustable wrench after this. So, thing comes back out. Red lubrication, whatever the heck it is, comes out of there. And that's installed nice and level. Thumbs up. So I just do the other four, same way. Other four, what am I talking about? Other three on this pad, other four on the other pad. That's installed. I switched to another one that doesn't have a second nut on it, just to, why am I doing this? Right, so I'm demonstrating the problem with not drilling those holes very far. I was planning to put those casters on, the idea being that I could raise the leg levelers in the right side up orientation to let the casters be the things that touch the ground, and lower the leg levelers to let them be the thing that's on the ground when it's stationary. But the problem is that since I only drilled the holes large enough for the threaded inserts themselves, the bolts on the leg levelers were long enough that the casters would not even come close to touching the ground when they're installed. So what would have been better is if I drilled a large hole. Right, so I'm testing it here to make sure it feels solid. It was pretty good. I could feel a tiny bit of flexing, but that was probably just like the frame itself, rather than, well, of course it was the frame itself. It didn't feel like it was severely bowing inward. So this is the other pad, I got those installed, and I'm testing it the same way. Right, so ideally I would have drilled a hole of the diameter that I used there, just large enough for the threaded insert, and then a slightly smaller diameter one inside that, going much deeper, so that the threads on the rest of the bolt would have a place to go, so that it could tighten all the way up. But I didn't do that, and I didn't really have the wood arrangement to make it work. Anyway, now that that part's done, there's a whole bunch of holes that need to be put into this in various places. I'll be doing more next episode. I'm actually getting ahead of these, so the next one of these might be coming sooner rather than later. So handle joint bracket there. Needs some things marked, because I'm going to drill holes for its bolts to go through. Just using a pencil to run around the outside of those holes. But then I realize there's actually a better way to do it. I guess I decided to remark because those weren't good enough. But then I think, well, why am I doing that, using a pencil and taking it out, when I could just go ahead and pre-drill right now with it in there, get it exactly centered, see that it's centered with the actual thing I'll be attaching there, and that makes so much more sense. So the pencil marking was a little bit pointless. I just do this instead, and it makes a lot more sense. So 4 of those are anchored just to the base plate. The other 4 are anchored both to the base plate and those notches in the 2x3 frame. I'm using a 3/8 inch drill bit here. This is another one that's stubborn and likes to just screw itself into the wood and go straight down. So I have to hold it. Guess I didn't have it in there very good. So I have to hold it sort of upward as I'm drilling downward, because it really wants to pull down. And I want it to cut a clean hole rather than just screwing itself in. The leg levelers are on, and I have an extra piece of plywood under there to try to protect my floor. I did manage to drill into my floor twice by now already. Not very deep, but I noticed a couple of marks. So when it does that, I just reverse the drill, back it out, and try again a little slower. Thrust in and out a few times, make sure the hole is nice and clean. A little more to drill through in these. Every time you can hear the pitch lower, that means it's sort of pulled itself downward, so I'm trying to stop it and make sure it doesn't just screw itself all the way in. So some people recommended to me that I try pre-drilling with smaller drill bits and just get progressively larger. I did not actually find that to be particularly helpful. It felt pretty much exactly the same, just to go straight to the larger one. Maybe that's because I'm using the tool to pre-drill with the hammer for all of these. So it's guided into place. This one is very stubborn. So it's guided into place, but the large drill bit does just fine at cutting the hole initially. So do that 12 more times. 4 more on this pad, 8 more on the other one. Make sure my floor protector is actually under the thing. Can't see it, but it's down there somewhere. This stuff makes a real interesting tree sap smell whenever I hit a knot or something close to it. If I don't, it just smells like sawdust. So I got one of the bolts that's going to be going through there. Actually 2 of them. So I'm testing to make sure they can actually go through, because there will be nuts on the bottom holding them in place. Those threads are not supposed to screw through the wood. They're just supposed to go all the way through. I would have used a slightly larger drill bit. This was the largest one I had in the drill bit set that I had bought with the drill. So I decided to just use it, and if the screw bolt fits a little bit tightly, then I'll just work on that hole a little bit more. That's why I'm testing here, so I know the ones that need additional work. So a couple of those need some extra drilling. Just go in again. Thrust in and out a few times. Sometimes I sort of press against the edges to try to get those smoothed out. Right, so those three were the problem ones. Test again, see how well I've done. That one goes through. That one goes through just fine, mostly. Can push it back up from the bottom. This one I think is still a problem. Just does not want to go in. Try to hammer it in with the other bolt I have, but no luck. Just does not want to go. So more work needed there. And there we go. Goes in and out. Nice and clean. So same thing, other pad. It's interesting, the player 2 base plate is significantly sort of darker and yellower than the player 1 one. I don't know how that happened. They were cut from the same piece of wood. I guess just one side was darker than the other. And I think they're the same way up. Just, yeah. Don't know how that happened. Has the player 2 ones. That one's problematic. Yeah, good enough. It hammers through. So is that all of them? Yeah, so now I go ahead and vacuum up the sawdust since there's so much in there. This stuff makes such a big mess. I don't show the cleanup very often for this because there's just so much of it and it's kind of annoying. But yeah, vacuum cleaner comes in handy for spaces like that where I can't just sweep it off an edge. Alright, so at this point, I'm sanding down the edge finish, so there are some extra pieces that need to attach to the frame. That is a horrendous sound. That's why I'm wearing ear protection. So all those pieces are labeled on both sides, so that I know which is which. I selected an up side, which will be painted, because those are part of the outside surface, and in order to make them look authentic, I want them to be red. So I have my third can of spray paint here, the red one. I'm actually doing this outside this time. It was a little bit of a rainy day, but I managed not to actually get any rain on that. I picked a time that was just good enough. It was kind of late in the evening, so it's a little bit dark. The sun was setting or had set at this point. So this can lasted through a first coat and a decent second coat. So those had 2 coats of spray paint. I think 3 is optimal, but I didn't have enough for it. So I was painting both the top and the sides of those because some of the sides will be exposed. Oh right, I'm skipping ahead to this. So this is a minor thing. This won't come into play until much later. That device that I'm penciling around is my UHID. That's what interfaces between the wires that go to the sensors and the USB port. So I've just marked out the little holes in it. It's going to be mounted there. That's the upright panel on the player 1 base plate. So I'm just drilling in with little tiny drill bits. I forget what this was. I think it was like 15/64ths or something. Much smaller than everything else. So again, I don't get to the point of mounting this yet, but I just wanted to have the holes there for when I'm ready to screw into them, since I was doing so much drilling with that stuff. So that spot's done. Edge finish paint is mostly dried, so I've stood up one of the pads and marked where I need to drill through it. I'll show the marking process on the next piece for this. So I'm going to drill through that and attach it to the frame. So I got to get that lined up real nice. My point of reference is the bottom of the pad that's facing me. I want it to be exactly lined up with that, and then it sticks up out of the top a little bit. Because there's a bunch of stuff that's going to be going on top of the frame, which will elevate the inner part of it. And these are cut exactly to the same height as that. So I'm trying to hold that firmly in place as I drill, hoping it won't shift around too much. The alignment of these really does matter a lot. Ideally, I'd have a perfectly level surface on top, so I get just as close as I can. Slow is kind of better here. I don't want to go too fast. I think I demonstrate this later, but the way I've put that drill bit in is if I just seat it all the way, it wasn't long enough, so I pulled it out just long enough to be the length of the screws I'm putting in, which was 2 inches. Since drills just hold their bits in place with friction, it's fine to run it like that. So I've drilled 2 holes at one end. I realized later that I only needed one of these at this point, but I did two, and this was the first piece that I attached, so I was figuring stuff out. Paint was still just a little bit sticky because this was the same day that I painted it. It had only had a few hours to dry, but it was enough. So I'm putting in these 2 screws in order to hold it in place for the rest of the drilling, because if I don't have anything holding it in place, any one of the holes that I drill could move it out of alignment. So ideally I'd want to get a screw in as early as possible. Like I say, I realized later that I should just do one at each end. At this point I remember that this screwdriver has a ratchet in it, so I actually use it. For some reason I'm not using my drill to screw the screws in. I realized that later and switched to that too. This one's at a little bit of an awkward angle. I'm going to hold it from the right while I drill on the left. I guess I could have turned it around or stood on the other side, but I didn't. So 2 holes in that side. Only really needed to be 1, but I did 2 at this point. The idea is that 2 screws as far apart as possible will anchor the piece best. If they're close, there might be a little bit of more wiggle room on the other end, but if they're on opposite ends, then it'll hold everything all the way in place perfectly. So then I can drill the rest of the holes worry-free. This one happens to get 8. Put in all the screws, still doing it by hand. So again, those are just the 2-inch wood screws. They sort of countersink themselves and hold the 2 pieces tightly together. So I have this down on the floor. That one piece on the left is already attached. The second one's going on here, on the outside edge of the player 1 pad, I believe this is. So most of the horizontal screw positions, well, horizontal from this perspective, line up to the edge of frame pieces. So that's how I'm placing my square there. So it's on the right edge of those all the way to the left 2x3s. Then I just have specific measurements from the top of that, where I'm placing a pencil mark, so that it goes through sort of the top and bottom of the 2x3 frame, because I want it anchored to... I basically want the screws as wide as I can get them without going outside the 2x3s. They're not quite as far apart vertically as I would like them to be, but I mean that's just how wide the 2x3 is, so that was as far apart as they went. So line up carefully, pre-drill, actual drill. Guess I still did 2 on that one side. Put in screws. Make sure it's lined up. Drill the other 2. And repeat the same process again. I think this gets the same number of screws as the other one. Yep, 8 there. This was all planned out, the positions of these were all planned out carefully in my schematic to dodge the other screws and hold these in place in points where they would be stressed and stuff like that. So that worked fine. In some later parts of these, in the coming video, you're going to see some places where I did not plan out my screw intersections very well, and it doesn't actually cause problems, but it causes a little bit of wonkiness. Because like with the number of things that are screwed into this at this point, it's getting a little bit crowded, so it's sometimes hard to dodge the screws while I'm doing all the stuff I'm doing. So that little corner piece is kind of a slightly tricky one. I have to do it at a really awkward angle right here. And there are 2 particularly tricky screws that I'm trying to dodge with these positions. Just kind of have to guess what's level at this point. I could have used my drill guide attachment, but it would have been more of a pain. And it doesn't really matter too much if it's not perfectly square. Like, It's nice if it is, but it doesn't absolutely have to be. So you get one. Right, it's at this point I realize I just need opposite corner drilling. I'm only putting 4 holes in this, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But yeah, other than the weird angle, it's the same as all the others. And now the other 2 pieces that need to go on. Same process, different number of screws and things. Here I finally realize that I can use the screwdriver drill bit, and it'll be a lot easier. Best to go nice and slow with these, because again, I don't want to sink them in too far. The ideal would be exactly level with the piece, but I don't want them to protrude, so at the very least level. This is the shortest one, so it only gets 6 screws. This here is the longest one, so it gets, I think it's actually 12. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6... It's either 10 or 12, I forget. I think it's actually 10. When I'm drilling these, I forget 2 of the holes on one end. I correct it later. Actually, I forget 3 of the holes. One of the things I pre-drilled, I just did not actually drill. It's the one next to this. Right to the left of that from the camera's perspective. So switch bits, put in screws. Or actually, no, I had already... Wow, yeah. My video editing was too fast. I had already switched bits again and re-drilled that hole that I forgot. So yeah, that is the edge finish attached to one of the pads. I did the other one the same day. Didn't bother filming it because it's just the exact same process again. So this thing is starting to look pretty good. Lay it down on the ground so you can see what it looks like. I have a little bit of trouble with my tripod here. So yeah, that is the state of that as of this recording. I've actually done a whole bunch more. Like I said, the next one of these might come up a little bit sooner than usual, just because I'm a little bit ahead of schedule now. So yeah, I'll see you next time for a little bit more, actually a whole bunch more holes that need to be drilled in that, and getting closer to full assembly.